and carbs are either demonized or ignored or way overconsumed. And proteins as a whole are usually completely just forgotten about.
A lot of the times our body's signaling to eat more, and most of the time it just needs more protein.
You know, carbs and fats, one, they just taste good. Yeah, they're just delicious.
Falling into this idea that everybody who's healthy and everybody who's active we're all just eating the same like chicken, rice, and broccoli.
Welcome to the Lucid Fitness Podcast. I'm Erik and this is Sarah, and we started Lucid Fitness to help beginners find actionable guidance in a sea of fitness and nutrition information.
Welcome back to the Lucid Fitness Podcast. I'm Erik and this is Sarah, and this is a 6th episode of our initial 7 Lucid Fitness principles. The last few episodes we were talking about calories in and calories out and consuming whole, nutritious whole foods. Yeah. This is the 3rd and final part of the nutrition side of our Lucid Fitness principles, and today we're going to talk about the macronutrients, and we're going to talk about eating the right amount of healthy protein and healthy fats and how many carbohydrates you should eat. So the 6th Lucid Fitness principle is ensuring you're eating an adequate amount of healthy proteins and healthy fats.
As we talked to before in calories in versus calories out, once you've calculated your calories, and of course, if you haven't calculated your calories, you can find any calorie calculator online, or you can go to the Lucid Fitness app where it's very easy to find a calorie calculator. Once you've sorted that out, then it is broken down into 3 main factors, which are protein, fats, and carbs. Why are protein and fat, healthy fats, some more important than carbs?
They're not necessarily more important, but there is an importance there that carbohydrates really doesn't hit, and it's that our body requires them. Like, you require a certain amount of protein for a functioning body. You require a certain amount of fats for a functional body. Well, at Lucid Fitness, we still preach eating carbohydrates as an energy source. Most people are using carbohydrates as an energy source. It's not a required thing, right? And so we kind of let it fall into more of a secondary macronutrient to fill in our calories once we've hit the right amount of protein and the right amount of fat, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
It always seems to me like fats and carbs are either demonized or ignored or way overconsumed, and proteins as a whole are usually completely just forgotten about.
Yeah, it's a strange thing because for the most part, like, no single food, no whole food, which for the most part we'll be talking about whole foods in general for this episode. Most whole foods aren't just one thing, right? You know, obviously, if you're eating white rice, it's primarily carbohydrates, but even probably the most processed food that we'd consider a whole food would be, some sort of grain like white rice, or some sort of processed oil like olive oil. Mm-hmm. Olive oil is very much so entirely fat, and white rice for the most part is almost entirely carbohydrates, but there's still even trace levels in white rice of protein. There's no fat, but the idea is, like, whole foods are a combination, right? And so when we're talking about like a whole food diet, it's important to recognize that eating a bunch of fruit is going to give you a whole lot of carbohydrates, but not a huge amount of protein and a huge amount of fat. Mm-hmm. And so even if these foods are fundamentally good for you, like fruits are good for you, they're packed with nutrition, there's still more to the equation than just eating fruits and vegetables, right? Mm-hmm. And so we need to break down and talk about, okay, how much protein, how much fat, how much carbohydrates. And you're right that fat and carbohydrates are very much one way or the other, either stigmatized or overconsumed to some extent. Like carbohydrate consumption and to a large extent fat consumption is the reason for obesity. It's like overconsuming those macronutrients. Nobody ever got extremely overweight from eating a very, very high protein diet. It just fills you up too much. There's a lot of things signaling that your body requires, protein content. And we talked about this on one of the previous episodes, where a lot of times our body's signaling to eat more, and most of the time just needs more protein.
Eating protein requires, it's very filling, but it also requires a lot of energy in itself for our bodies to process. Yeah. So you get full up. But, carbs and fats, one, they just taste good. Yeah, they're just delicious, right? They're very palatable. As a kid of the 90s and early 2000s, I remember that era of there was no fat in anything. And I remember how awful things tasted. Fats just make things taste good and carbs are good. And these things aren't bad. And I think they're just high energy foods. They have a lot of energy to them. And if you're not using that energy when you've consumed them, they're causing a problem.
Right. And it's interesting. I think as a society, we're finally coming to the understanding that we can't demonize any single macronutrient. They all have their purpose and they all should be consumed to some extent for the most part, unless for whatever reason you have, a medical reason to cut carbohydrates from your diet. Usually you want to be eating at least some of all of it. And so we're trying to break it down to what is that some, how many of each you should be eating. And it's a very contentious point on the internet. Some people believe in much higher protein. Some people believe in, really low fats, really low carbs. And, I think that there's somewhere in between, and it's very exploratory for a person. And so we're going to try to give you guidelines on, what we think is a right amount of each macronutrient, and then you can kind of play along with it and figure out what works for you.
So almost like how we talked about with working out, right? Mm. We want to do all of our movements, all of the compound movements, but then once you're in there and you're doing it, we're giving you the foundation, but you then can take off with that and really be so in tune with your body that you're able to go, you know what, I run better with a little less carbs, with a little more fats, or I run better with a little more carbs and a little less fats. You're able to kind of be more in tune, and we're trying to give you the foundation to start and then be able to succeed in that.
Right. And it's not super delicate either, right? Our bodies are very adaptable. Eating, high fat for a few weeks or a few months even, it's going to be fine, right? I've gone as high as 40 to 50% of my calories coming from fat. I've since toned it back because you start to feel your body and okay, well, I'm not digesting as quickly as I should. I'm going to bed with a stomach ache. Maybe I need to reel back in the fat, and that's where the guidelines that we give you, they'll be functional and they'll cover all of your needs. And so it's up to you to discover what your body needs at a more granular level, right? Because we can't tell that for you, not without, all of seeing the entire variables of your life. Like we've talked about previously, it's trying to put, our puzzle piece into your puzzle, and it's just not going to work. But as a core, we've got protein, we have fats, and we have carbohydrates. All of these are important, especially for somebody who's looking to start a fitness journey as well as a nutrition journey, which we preach. We think they go hand in hand. You really can't go as hard as you should, consistent as you should at the gym if you're not eating right. Right. And so we need each of these macronutrients. Protein, it's an important building block. It allows us for muscular development, it allows for recovery, it allows for signaling in the body, all sorts of things. Fats is really good for our hormones. It's good for our energy levels. Our body does use fats for energy. And then carbohydrates, we've got a great energy source. It's important for, our joints and all various things. They all are important for a fitness and nutrition journey. And stigmatizing any one of them is just going to hurt you in the long run. So it's important to find a balance of things that work for you. If you don't really like fatty foods, like fatty whole foods, you don't like fatty cuts of meat, you don't like fatty vegetables, yeah, you can eat more proteins and carbs, and in all likelihood, as long as you're controlling your calories, you're still going to hit your goals.
So let's go ahead and just break right into it. Where, as Lucid Fitness, do we stand on how you should delegate your calories, your allotted calories for the day between protein, fats, and carbs?
As simple as it can be. Right? There is always going to be when you're trying to fine tune things, there's always going to be a certain level of math to do, right? We're not doing trigonometry, but there will be, if you want to take this seriously, you have to at least do some sort of calculation in your head, right? While we have, like you mentioned earlier, we do have a calculator both on our website and in our app that can not only give you your calories, but it'll help you identify how many of each macronutrient. If you want to do the pen and paper math yourself, we have guidelines for that as well. And so I recommend for protein as a primary macronutrient target is to aim for a gram a pound. So if you weigh 150 pounds, aim for 150 grams of protein. For some people, it's going to be a lot. Like if you're 500 pounds and you're severely overweight, it's going to be really hard to eat that much protein, but it's probably good for you to fill up with protein, right?
Right.
And so that's kind of the game is like, if you're an average weight, you're going to have an average amount of protein, right? Like if you're between, 150 to 200 pounds, then, that's a reasonable amount to eat in the day. For the most part, people can eat that. So we take a gram per pound of your body weight. And this is the upper end of what the vast majority of people need. And this is a very much argued, if you go to the Mayo Clinic, it'll say, significantly less than this. If you look at the RDA, it'll say, 0.8 per kilogram. Like really, there's a massive range. And the reason this range exists is because a lot of different things work, and you can go from the bare minimum, which is how much my body needs to function, which is what the RDA would be. And then the upper ends, which would be the optimal amount that an athlete would need to consume, somebody who's very active, which we'd like for most of you to eventually get to a very active state, how much they need at an optimal level. And so that's what we're targeting. And it just happens to be really easy to remember if you're imperial, right? And so we aim for a gram of protein per pound of body weight, or it's a gram per 2.2 kilograms, or whatever the equation is. For the fats, it's more of a range. So once you have that, you can calculate how many calories you have for protein, right? So let's say I'm 200 pounds. I want 200 grams of protein and multiply it by the number of calories per gram of protein, which is 4. So we got 4 times, that's 800 calories of my calories that are going to protein. Sounds like a lot, but most of us eat around 2,000 to 3,000 calories, right? Or between 1,500 and 3,000 calories. And then once we know that number, we're going to take our total calories. We can calculate how many fats that we have. And our range is 25 to 35% of our calories in fat. So the calculation is a little different than protein, but 25 to 35% of our calories are fat calories. The lower end would be the typical amount for body functioning, for making sure our body continues to run. And then 35% would be on the upper end. That's more optimal for hormone production. And it's not a hard range, but it's an important range, and it's big enough that it'll cover like the vast majority of people. And so what does 25 to 35% mean? In the case of 2,000, it'd be 500 calories of fat. And then once you know how many calories of fat, to get how many grams you would need, you would just take 500 calories of fat divided by 9, which is how many calories are in a gram of fat. And I know it's a little confusing. Like I said, recommend using a macronutrient calculator, right? So once you know your calories, getting on our app and going to our nutrient target, or nutrition target is what it's called, and allows you to punch in your calories, and it'll do this for you, right? And so once you have your fat calculated, right? So you have your protein, let's say 200 grams of protein, and then I have 70 grams of fat. And then what's left? Carbohydrates, right? And so all of the remaining calories that you have will just go into carbohydrates. And so carbohydrates is more of a dynamic thing. And it's the appropriate way to handle like a bulk and cut cycle. And so as you cut your calories, you don't want to cut your protein. Protein's still important when you're losing weight. you don't want to cut your fat too much because hormones are still important for the functioning of your body. So you cut your carbohydrates. And so as your calories come down, you lower your carbohydrates, and that kind of regulates your calories. Your carbohydrates kind of like the it's the macronutrient that's kind of completely adjusted based on your goals.
Yeah, it's almost like a throttle.
Right.
You can throttle it up and throttle it back down depending on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and so when you're on a bulk, you want more carbs in general, so more of your calories will fill in. And you don't have to constantly calculate. Like if you lose 10 pounds, you don't have to go through and recalculate everything to get your macros right. For the most part, that higher protein is going to carry you through most of your goals, and then making sure you're still eating the right amount of fat. And that's probably where we slip up the most in terms of, you probably see it a lot with women when they're on cuts, is their calories get so low that they want to cut the fats because those fats are very
calorically dense.
Exactly. Like there's 9 calories per gram of fat versus 4. And so cutting a gram of fat gives you a lot more calories to put into
other things that make you feel, when you're on a cut, especially if you're a woman and you are on a cut and you've been into it for a little bit, you're going to be hungry. And you start to think, well, this is just going to be able so I can eat more. I can feel like I'm eating more food. But it's very counterintuitive to that, because what's going to make you feel like you're eating more food and make you feel full is those proteins. The proteins are massively important for that. You are going to feel like you actually ate something. And then those fats, especially for women between the ages of 15 and 45, are so important. And not having enough of them for an extended period of time does years of damage on your body. So you do need to, it's very important. You have to be very conscious of this. So the more you can throttle those carbohydrates, even though it feels good to eat them, and really maintain your proteins and your healthy fats, you're going to be able to maintain a lot longer. But of course, then also, as your body weight comes down, there is a certain point where you're going to have to recalculate calories. It's not going to always, for men, it's a little bit different. You can get away with a lot more. For women, when you go from 150 pounds to 130 pounds, how many calories you're burning is massively different. So do keeping a pulse on recalculating your calories, at least like every 10 to 15 pounds you've gone down, do a recalculation just so that you're continuing to be on track.
That's kind of what we're trying to teach is giving the tools to, properly recalculate. And this will feel a lot more natural. What we see online is like so many different approaches to this where it needs to be distilled into not necessarily the scientific optimal or, not necessarily, what your favorite, online fitness person is doing, but something that's like sustainable, is learnable, something that can be, applied rapidly so you're not like losing sleep over it, right? Like I don't want you going to sleep like thinking, oh, I lost 3 pounds last week, I need to recalculate. But there is a certain, at a certain point, you can't continue to make progress with what gave you the original like weight loss, for example. Right. Like if you lose 10 pounds, and that's 10% of your body weight, it's like, yeah, things are going to happen.
You're going to notice it. You're going to see the plateau happen.
Right, for sure.
And then you'll be like, oh, something needs to be changed up.
Right. But in summary, what I'm saying and trying to articulate it as clearly as possible, 1 gram per pound of body weight for protein is generally a good guideline. And people will argue this to death. Yeah. I don't really care to argue it. I think it's easy to remember this way, and I think it's more than enough for the vast majority of people, the vast majority of natural athletes. And then fat, 25 to 35% of your calories, again, calculated how I mentioned it earlier, and then fill the rest of your calories with carbohydrates. This is going to give you a really balanced approach, and you're only really going to feel like it's unbalanced at really extreme ends of the spectrum, like really high calories or really low calories. For me, an example is when I consume over 4,000 calories a day, it starts to feel like the only really way to hit that is with a whole lot of fat. And that's why I ate so much fat for a long time. So I definitely broke out of that, but I was eating at a much higher level than an average person. And a lot of the times, in kind of like how I mentioned earlier, if you're 500 pounds, that's a lot of protein, right? That we're not even mentioning the price of that and the logistics around, getting that out of your body down the road, like that's
would a good thing to say would be more like a gram of protein per pound of goal body weight. Like, let's say you are morbidly obese, you're 400 pounds, your goal is to get down to 180 pounds, in a year or in, a year and a half. Consuming, instead of 400 grams of protein, 180 grams of protein or 190 grams of protein is much more doable and rememberable, and is still going to keep those proteins pretty high for your body.
Right. For the sake of simplicity, for sure. If you can hit 1 gram per pound, that's great. But again, on the extreme side, it's hard, right? It's hard to hit that much. Even at 200, you're eating a lot of food. But I'm still of the belief that if you're that far overweight, you'd probably benefit from filling your stomach up with protein, right? It's going to go, it may not be comfortable, but it's
you're gonna be much more satisfied.
yeah, for sure. If I was eating 500 grams of protein a day, I'd feel satisfied. But there's also limits to our body, how much we can actually, I'm sure we'd be able to adapt to it, but even digesting that much protein, it seems like a lot. And so this isn't an end all be all. This is a target. And, if you're severely overweight and eating even more than 250 grams is far too much for you, then the bigger thing that matters is the calories, right? And so if that means eating more fats and more carbohydrates, as long as you're hitting your calories.
The calorie itself.
Yeah. And so I think that, again, this isn't a hard line. There's going to be infinite fringe cases. What about sick people? What about, athletes? What about people who, on keto? Like, there's infinite variables. And so we're trying to distill it into a single target that, for the most part, it's going to cover the vast majority of people. And I think a gram per pound is that number. It's really easy to remember if you use pound as a unit of measurement, and it's easy to adjust to. Going back to what we were saying, it's like, I lost 10 pounds, I can eat 10 pounds less of protein. You may choose not to. You may be like, I feel like 190 grams is enough. I want to take that to 170 pounds. Like, some people work well with high protein, right?
So let's talk about and break down specifically healthy fats. Like, what are some good sources of healthy fats?
Right. Healthy fats are in the realm of whole foods are generally going to be attached to another macronutrient, right? You're going to see in plants, you're going to see, like olives, for example, would be a healthy plant fat. They've got some fat, they have some carbs. Another one would be avocado, similar thing, healthy fats, healthy carbs. And then on the protein side, the animal side of things, usually it's going to be attached to an animal protein. So you have eggs, meats, and most meats, even lean cuts of meats, will have some fat, some animal fats attached to it. And then you have the processed one, which we kind of said is in the gray side of things. We have oils, which are probably the most tricky of the fats, right? Because we have powerhouses like olive oil and avocado oil that are, very easy to prove they're good for you. Mm-hmm. But then you have all of these other seed oils and, oils. There's so many different oils that it's kind of confusing. But for the most part, if you're sticking to, olive oil, avocado oil,
coconut
oil, like these things, they're good sources of fat. But usually, if you're
or butter or ghee or something like that.
Animal fats that are functionally, the same thing as what's attached to a cut of meat, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just saturated fats. But without diving too much into all of the different fats, like I think that if you're targeting whole foods and you're trying to eat, a fair amount of fatty foods or fatty meats and vegetables, you'll be getting decent amount, and usually you cook with it. I find that fats are probably the easiest to just get, right? You cook in oil, you eat, a fatty cut of meat or a fatty cut of fish or a few olives.
Put butter on your rice. If you eat a rotisserie chicken, the skin tastes the best part anyway, and that's full of fats. Like, it's not hard to eat fats. It's very easy to overeat fats.
Right. So it's easy to overeat it because they are calorically dense, right? But eating a burger from McDonald's, those fats are gonna be a lot more accessible than eating a ribeye steak, right? Like they are not the same. Even though they may have like similar levels of fat, even they are not the same in what they're doing to your body and how they're filling you up, right? Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, there's these fats that are attached to foods, right? Whole foods, and then there's added fats, which oils would be considered, but again, without going back into the hyperpalatable food end of the spectrum, like these foods are designed with oils and fats that are an unnatural source, where you get things like trans fats, which are functionally made in a factory and added to foods to make them more delicious, I guess. I'm not quite sure why we still use trans fats, but there's a reason that eating a whole lot of fast food and eating like a fatty, nutritious cut of meat not only makes you feel totally different, but over a long term is going to make you look and live in a very different world, because one's good for you and one's not. So again, like if you're sticking to all of the core principles, which we recommend you do, it's going to be a lot harder to eat bad fats if you're targeting these whole foods, right?
Absolutely. And a lot of that is also going to come down to what you like, right? Do you prefer butter or ghee or avocado oil or coconut oil? What makes it taste good to you? Again, they're not really hard to find or eat or add to stuff.
But to go back to your question, like in a more direct manner, if we're talking about what healthy fats to eat, we want, fatty cuts of meat, but, occasionally, obviously not eating a ribeye every night. It's probably not good for you, but, red meat, and then you got salmon, and then you like you said, chicken thighs. And then you have eggs, another powerhouse, lots of protein, lots of fat. So animal foods, if you eat animal foods, and then you have the plant side of the spectrum, which is, like I said, we got olives, we got avocado, I didn't mention it earlier, but nuts. Nuts are kind of tricky because they're very easy to eat, right? Especially if you're getting like flavored nuts from the store, which is fine. Most of that flavorings, not a lot of extra calories, but it makes it more palatable, right? So you're more likely to overconsume.
Yeah, so they fall into kind of the potato chip calories.
Right. So while they're better than potato chips, they can be very edible. Yeah. And then we have the more processed side of it, which we probably didn't touch on as much as we should have in the whole food side of things, because it's kind of, again, it's like kind of gray, right? We're talking about foods that are processed. Olive oil is a very processed food. Obviously, it's not in nature like this. These vegetables are processed, but there's a lot to suggest that these oils are okay for us. And again, like
I think they fall into that minimally processed.
Yeah.
Because in the cases of things like olive oil or avocado oil, macadamia oil, it's really, they're crushed. That's it. They're just smushed and then filtered. Especially things when it says cold processed, it's not been heated or super refined. It falls into that minimally processed category. With again, gray area, like protein powder and that sort of thing.
It's kind of like how I mentioned before. I think eating an olive is always going to be healthier than, a tablespoon of olive oil, but a tablespoon of olive oil is always going to be healthier than, some of the seed oils. And some of those seed oils are going to be even healthier than, some of the stuff they're putting, like these trans fats and things they put in fast foods. Like there is a spectrum, right? Absolutely. And again, being realistic, a lot of the times hitting your fat goals without using any like additive oils is unrealistic, because people cook in things because it makes things taste better. And, again, we're trying at that 80-20 type thing, like 80% whole foods, and the rest we're filling up with things that are adding pleasure to food without over pleasure, I guess.
And I think fats out of all of them are the ones where you really are going to find that in part they do need to be processed. Like you can't just take milk and drink all of it enough to make, a tablespoon of butter. Like we've always processed fats out of food through all of history.
And it's unfortunate there's not like another word, because there's processing and then there's processing, right?
I that's why I hesitate, and it's almost that minimally processed, because it's minimally processed.
Like, I didn't eat the corn directly off the stalk. It was processed by the human.
Because I cut it off. Like,
right? Like there's layers to it, right?
There's absolutely layers. But I think fats out of all of them are kind of the ones where we do, for the most part, process them to a degree to get the fat. Right. The fat solid from something.
And there is nuance to it. And the website goes over like a lot of it has like 2 little scroll away things where you can scroll through and see like what healthy fats are. I'll even go back and I'll look and see to add some more, just so you can like scroll through but yeah, in general, like if you Google like what are healthy fats, the first response will be AI, and then the rest, there's a million sources out there, right? And so, while Lucid Fitness, we want to teach you how to eat and what types of things to eat. We don't want to tell you like, oh, you should be eating avocado every day. Oh, you should be eating nuts every day. We don't want to tell you that things. We want you to find like, okay, here's a broad, gigantic amount of healthy foods you can choose from. Choose the ones you like, right? Choose the ones that you can eat.
Because that's going to be the most sustainable for you. Yeah. Because if you like it, you'll be more likely to eat it. If you are like, well, I was told to eat this, one, you're already stepping off on I was told to do it, right? But if you have a big choice and you can pick and choose, you already mentally are not stepping into it from a lack space. You're stepping into it as a picking and choosing space. And us as humans, we always would rather pick and choose and feel better than come at it from like, I don't get to have.
Yeah, and I think it is partly an illusion that there aren't a lot of options, right? And I started noticing that a lot, like doing the app and doing some of the nutrition aspects of the app. It's like, man, like there's a lot of healthy foods, right? Like there's some like I had never even heard of. I was like, what is this? But like there's a lot of choices, right? And especially when you broaden your scope to like other cultures and stuff, they're eating vegetables, eating fruits that we've never even heard of. Right. And you could walk into, an Asian market and get fruits and vegetables that you can't find elsewhere. And they're good for you. Yeah. Fruits and vegetables are good for you. Right. And so just kind of broaden our perspective of what it is we can eat, instead of falling into this idea that everybody who's healthy and everybody who's active we're all just eating the same like chicken, rice, and broccoli. We don't do that, right? We probably eat far more diverse foods than I'd say like the vast majority of people who are eating out every night, right? Because we're trying new things. We're trying different combinations of things, and we just make our things collections of whole foods, right, as a base.
That's definitely setting, especially the children, up for being able to have a broad view of, because whatever you eat, your kids are going to eat. That's what they're going to be learning from. And being able to pick and choose and have like multiple different recipes with all of these whole foods where they can kind of go, oh, and this tastes like this, and this is good, and I like this, and I'm not a big fan of that, like really sets them up for the best success.
It's leading by example, right? And not just with kids, but with, family members, friends as well, right? Like, hey guys, I have this awesome recipe, it just also happens to be good for you, right? And let me show you, right?
Great potluck opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. Because we're never, like you and I, we're never going to lower the food we're making to please like a group. Like if we ever host, the food we're going to provide is going to be the same thing, we're going to eat. It's not all of a sudden like here's a bunch of, slop, right? It's going to still, and so that's the most contagious way of doing this, is not telling people it's like, oh, like you have to eat quinoa. It's like, no, make quinoa taste good, and people will be like, oh yeah, quinoa is good, right? Things like that.
I love that. Okay, so we've touched on healthy fats. I feel like we also pretty much touched on protein. Maybe we'll go into good sources of protein and good sources of lean protein. But then I would like for us to touch on what are some things that are, especially in this broad world of the internet, that are marketed as full of protein that are not a good protein source.
That's a lot to unpack, but first and foremost, we'll talk about what are good sources of protein.
Yeah, what are good ones?
To consider a food a protein source, and this will kind of loop back around to your next point. To consider something a protein source, it's got to be a majority protein, right? I'm gonna go back to the example of a ribeye. There's a lot of protein in a ribeye. I would consider a ribeye a healthy protein source. And so these cuts of meat are largely protein sources, right? And healthy protein sources. If you don't eat meat, you have things like vegetables, vegetable proteins like soy and tofu, things like that, like soy-based things. And I think that where you get lost is when you're looking for protein and things that the protein is a secondary attribute. Like I think the example you used earlier is peanut butter, right? Technically, like if you ate enough peanut butter, you could get all of your protein for the day. You'd also blast out of your calories because there's so much fat in it. And so I think that's what you mean when you're talking about like these products. They market themselves as like high in protein, but are they really?
Right. Like quinoa. Quinoa is another good. I always see people like hit your protein goals by adding quinoa. It's like, well, quinoa has more protein than rice, yes, but it's a carb.
Yeah, for sure.
It's got 3 grams of protein per half cup.
And that's kind of a marketing game, right? Obviously, if we have a certain amount of protein in our product, we can market it as a high protein product. And like you said, compared to other grains, it probably does have more protein, right? But at the end of the day, you'd have to eat a heck of a lot of quinoa in your day to hit your protein target, and you'd likely be messing up your other proportions. And so that's where these high protein, and you mentioned it, lean proteins, which would be a protein source that has like less fat naturally or has some fat removed. So something like a sirloin would have less fat than a ribeye. Absolutely. And I'm sure there's a less fatty cut than a sirloin too. And so finding what works for you. Like if you find the rest of your non-protein diet is lower in fat, you may eat fatty cuts of meat. But if you find you're getting, a lot of healthy fats elsewhere, you may need that lean protein. And again, going back to what you were mentioning, the choice is there, but it's not like, oh, I can just choose any of these foods, because you do still need a conscious decision to control your macronutrients, especially if you want to make the gains you want to make.
You got to kind of pick and choose. It can be the difference between, well, I had avocado toast for breakfast, so instead of salmon for dinner, I'm having cod. I had avocado toast for breakfast, so instead of chicken thighs, I'm having chicken breasts. It's that kind of dynamic. There's leaner things of protein, and then there's more fatty things.
There is a certain level of learning, right? There's a certain level of education, and we're giving you the base level, but we can't go through every single food and tell you how much fat it is compared to how much protein. You do, and we mentioned this in the previous conversations, you do have to learn to read nutritional labels or use a nutrition tracker, like the Lucid Fitness app, to really see what you just said, cod versus salmon, to somebody who doesn't understand the intricacies of macronutrients, that may not register as okay, why would you change those, right? But the reality is when you start actually looking at them as a number, right? It's one has more fats than the other, and that's really dictates how many calories are in it. And things start connecting, right? It's cod, it's got its certain macronutrient profile. It's always got this certain amount of calories compared to salmon. And now you start connecting dots. Now whenever I need so-and-so number of calories at the end of my day, I know that cod is a better choice than salmon. And you start to learn things based on, again, the foods that you like to eat, right?
Yeah. And just keeping track of what you are eating so that you can make those kind of pop fly decisions. I'll do that. If I get to the end of the day and maybe I really need some more protein, I am solid 40 grams low on my protein, that's when I'm going to go, okay, well, I can take fat-free yogurt and a scoop of protein powder, and I can make myself this little protein dessert that's going to put me right on track with my protein, and maybe is going to be a little bit more carbs, but it's not really super high on fat, so I don't blow out my calories. Yeah. You're able to kind of shift things and kind of figure out where those need to be.
Right, and I think fat-free yogurt's a perfect example, right? Because if you say fat-free yogurt, people are like, why are you avoiding fat? It's not necessarily that you're avoiding fat, it's a tool, right? Like fat versus, like you could eat both. Fat probably tastes better, but you still have this option of a higher protein, lower fat. It probably has more carbs than the fat version, but it's a tool, it's a mechanism, right? We know that yogurt is a food that's good for you. Mm-hmm. And so we have different types of yogurts for different things, like super fatty, Greek yogurt, whole milk Greek yogurt may not always work in every situation, right? But if you're desperate for calories, it could be a great choice.
Absolutely. If you're low on calories, or you're bulking, you're trying to put on mass, I would not say your first grab should be fat-free yogurt. Right. But if you are cutting and you're already kind of a smaller woman and you need to lose, 15 pounds, it's going to be a much better option. One, because you're going to get much more protein, bang for your buck. You're going to feel like you get to actually eat, not this much food. Yeah. And it's going to feel a lot better without blowing your calories out.
And so to tie this all back to, your original question is like, what is a good healthy protein? And for the most part, like targeting these whole food cuts of animal meat, usually. And then you have things like eggs, you have things like soy and tofu. And then if you need it, you have the purest form of protein of all, like a protein powder. It's why it's so popular, right? Because it's like if you're at the end of the day and you're like, I don't really feel like eating anymore, but I need 20 grams of protein, just a scoop and drink it, right? And some are better than others, and you can argue all the different types of protein, but you just choose one that you like, and for the most part, it's going to have
read the nutritional label.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to have some protein.
And always, pick if you're at the end of the day and you need protein, pick a protein powder, pick a protein shake over a protein bar. That would be another great, just like we talked about with the salmon or with the yogurt, right? One is mostly protein, maybe just a little bit of fat, maybe a couple carbs. One is basically a Snickers bar with 15 grams of protein. Choose the tool that you need, right?
I know you hated protein bars. So this is a trend.
For you at all. Yeah.
And I mean, you have a point, right? Like choosing. It's funny because you kind of need to learn how to track this stuff so that you can learn how to track this stuff. And what I mean by this is you kind of have to try things to see how it fits into your diet, to see whether it can, be something you can regularly use. And it's very much like it's a skill. It's something that you kind of have to hone, right? Yeah. Finding foods that are both good, nutritious, and fit into your caloric and macronutrient needs. It's not a trivial thing, right? It's something that I think can be trivialized by people, especially when you try to start giving people do 30% protein, 20% fat, 50% carbohydrates. Try to give them this very tight, strict plan to follow. It becomes confusing. And so I think it's very important to learn these things with, the Lucid Fitness principles in your mind while you do it, right? So again, to kind of summarize what we talked about, a gram of protein per pound of body weight is usually a good target. And I say target, not a strict number. Like if you go under, fine, right? And more than likely, it's more than enough for the vast majority of people. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't hit that number every day, you're going to be fine. It's not going to matter. And then fats, 25 to 35%. This is just general recommendations for, between, optimal body function to hormone at the higher end of it. Some people need less, some people need more. It's a pretty wide range, especially with how calorically dense fat is. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. Mm-hmm. But try not to go under too much and definitely not trying to go over, because it's a quick, when you start eating that much fat, you're the calories will eventually be over. It's just the nature of fat. Every gram you add is 9 more calories, so it adds up real quick. And then filling the rest in with carbs, right? And I think that's a healthy approach to the situation. But figuring out, and also at the end of the day, you have to figure out what is the macronutrient profile of the foods that I like, right? And so maybe you spend a few weeks, a few months just trying things, and then you'll have to either read the nutritional labels or do more research into what the profile of these foods are, right? Like if you get addicted to avocado, you could overeat avocado. It's very calorically dense. The difference here being is avocado is a whole food, and it's going to be a lot more filling than eating some other fatty food, like your Snickers bar, for lack of better option. So identifying these whole foods that fit into your macronutrient goals, and then honestly not really stressing over the macronutrients. I think it gets more attention than I feel like it really matters, because people seem to think they have to fine tune it to an extreme level. And I think that it's important to focus on. But once you have like a general idea, I'm hitting my protein, I'm hitting my fats, I'm hitting my carbs, you can stop looking at it at such a granular level, like, oh, I only got 180 instead of 190 grams of protein. It's like, are your calories hit? Because these things average out over time, right? And just like I was saying, like if you weighed yourself every day, you'd see these massive fluctuations. Same kind of thing with macronutrients. Like some days you need more protein, some days you need more fats. And so trying to guess and trying to adjust like at too fine of a level is a recipe for burnout. Same kind of thing about what we mentioned with tracking calories. Like if you start obsessively trying to get exactly how many, like exactly 1 gram of protein per pound, exactly 25% of your, like that's hard to do, right? There's too much variance in life unless you're preparing every single meal perfectly, weighing every single food. And the vast majority of people don't want to do that, much less like are able to. I think that it's important to remember that while it matters on the long time frame, right? And so the day where you ate one extra piece of, avocado or whatever and went 10 grams over your fat, on the long-term scale of things, it means so little. It really does. And so reminding yourself that it doesn't necessarily have to be perfect, right? Like I largely eat intuitively, but when I track and I see it, it's like, man, I'm eating way more fat than I thought I was going to eat. Like, it's not like, oh, I don't feel bad because I lost gains or there's no downside to it, right? It's the idea of being conscious of these things that are most important, right? Absolutely. And just becoming conscious of these things, it makes you naturally gravitate towards more optimal levels. And so while we're giving you what could be seen as a fairly like strict macronutrient, we try to keep it dynamic within, but also being dynamic like internally with you, right? Like looking at it as like, I can't eat this much protein. Cut your protein. And if you join the Discord and you come and start asking me like, man, you said 200 grams of protein, I can't eat that much. I'll be the first one to tell you, eat less protein. Like it's not like if you're dreading doing something, you should probably change it.
It's like we talked about with everything. It's the consistency over time. The consistency that creates the trend that pushes it in the direction you want to go. Right. Those little things are not going to matter that much. It's when those little things continue to add up into a trend.
Right.
And you looking at it going, oh, I failed today. No, you didn't. You did this, and then the next thing you do something a little bit different, and you trend it the way you're conscious of going. It's the unconscious that flies off into chaos.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's exactly it. It's like, because I'm sure out there's a world where somebody's morbidly obese and are eating pretty similar macros to what we're saying. Maybe they're eating 190 grams of protein. Maybe they're eating between 25 and 35% of fat. But then it's like that third piece of the puzzle, because they're not conscious of what those carbs are doing. They're massively eating carbohydrates, which is putting them on a path of, and so that consciousness of like, if you went and told this person, it's like, man, you're 2/3 of the way there. You just got to reel in your carbs and you'd stop gaining weight. It's obviously a bigger thing than that. I'm not trying to, trivialize being obese, but it's this idea that like the conscious aspect of like taking control over your nutrition is a large part of the battle, right? And that's why, again, like I was mentioning earlier, that there's such a large range. There's people who believe you only need 0.8 per kilogram of body weight in protein, the RDA, versus people who believe you need 2 grams per pound of body weight. Like, why does this massive protein discrepancy exist? And I'm sure somewhere out there's a scientist who knows the real number, but the reality is it's like a lot of different things work.
I think humans are so adaptable that's why it's so extreme, right? Humans are so vastly adaptable. The reason we're giving the number that we're giving is because that one, it's the balance, it's in the middle, it's easy to remember, but also you want to make sure you have enough building blocks. You want to make sure protein and fats, like we said, are important for your body to function. We want you to have those building blocks, those Legos to build the physique that you want to build and to maintain the hormones that you need to function well in life, to not be suffering from brain fog, from not being so exhausted that you can't get out of bed to get to your workout. Those things are so important. So that's why we're basically having this whole episode around those important building blocks. Even though they're all important, this is the things we want you to be conscious of.
Yeah, and I think that if you watch this video after watching like a lot of other like macronutrient videos, it probably feels a little bit different, right? It probably feels like, well, they aren't digging into things, right? And it's not needed, like I'll straight up say it. It's like all that science and all of that, I don't disbelieve science. I believe science is an important thing, but all of that science, it really just distracts from the reality of things. Is we're adaptable. If we hit with somewhere within this range of what we're telling you, we're going to be better off than 99% of people, right? Because we're conscious of the fact that these things matter and we're taking control over things and we're learning what our body is doing. And so digging into it more than that, it's, in my opinion, it's detrimental. And it's why I've kind of built Lucid Fitness. And, granted, I did go into, several minutes of talking about the mathematics of calculating, because I do think the calculation, doing it once and, getting used to like what it means to calculate your macros, it teaches you a lot. Even the act of doing the math. I'm never going to lean into going too heavily. Like I could have easily gone into what's a saturated fat versus what's a trans fat versus what's a mono, like all of that, like deeper education. Like at the end of the day, like most beginners don't need that. Most beginners need to look at how many calories they're eating, look at the macros within those calories, and then choose foods that can hit that. Like trying to dig into a bunch of other variables that are providing like 1%, 5% benefits over just eating whole foods in the right proportions. Like it's detrimental, especially to beginners. You're trying to apply like elite practices to somebody who's not elite. And it's just, it honestly is detrimental. Trying to help people understand like these things are important, yes, but they aren't the end all be all. Like there'll never be a cookie cutter diet that makes everybody lose weight, like it doesn't exist, right? So it's more of the teaching you guys to be conscious of the things that are important. That's what the 7 Lucid principles are meant for, is teaching you the things to focus on at the level and the complexity to focus on them.